Welcome to today's webinar, Just a Chat. What are the election issues here in Canada and where do you stand? We've reviewed through the newsletter how each of the principal Canada Prime Minister candidates would answer several questions, including construction of the Unity, I call it Unity pipeline. Not asked, however, but increasingly obvious, is the all-encompassing question of, quote, what action would you take in the event of a global recession? Meaning a revenue shortfall, increased unemployment, further complicated by rising inflation. I'm speculating, but it's out there on the horizon. There's also the relevance to Canada of the serious rift that is emerging between China and the US. This might be even more serious. These and, well, other questions may galvanize our webinar today. So welcome and let's get started. Go ahead.
So addressing both, first of all, I think at least Carney and Poilievre are both talking about the possible results of a recession starting because of what's going on with the tariffs. And the whole idea is they have two completely different approaches. Carney talks about building an economic corridor, but he's going to leave C-69 in place, which will make sure that we leave all our minerals and our oil in the ground. And so when he talks about building a green economy, that's what Mr. Trudeau's been trying to do for the past 10 years, and it's been completely unsuccessful, and it's based on a whole series of flawed assumptions. Poilievre is talking very clearly about removing C-69, looking at C-48 and C-59, and trying to build that economic corridor in reality, as well at the same time as spurring, because with lack of restrictions and reducing regulation, trying to spur the mining sector in the Ring of Fire and all of the oil and gas. So they both talk the same talk about this energy corridor, but one of them with massive restrictions and the other one with a complete release of current restrictions, and trying to get the private sector to do it rather than the public sector. When you look at their two different approaches to housing, Carney wants to build a government bureaucracy to build houses and build them with government workers, where Poilievre wants to get rid of the regulation and let the private sector do what it always has done. So they both talk about it. There's two completely different approaches. Swinging around to China.
Before you go, so Carney clearly sees government as a economic instrument as opposed to a regulator or someone making sure that the private sector is vibrant, and if not, then government step in. It's implying that he doesn't believe private sector can do the job or will do the job.
Yeah, it certainly does, and unfortunately, we've seen this playbook before. Whenever government tries to do the private sector job, it never turns out well. Just look at the pipeline to the West Coast, tripling in costs. When if we had just gotten out of the way and allowed the private sector to build that pipeline and remove the ridiculousness of C-69, making it impossible for the private sector to recognize that that was going to be an economic viable pipeline, private sector does what private sector does best. Government, every time they get in, we increase the size of government by another 50% and nothing happens.
Well, one might also bring up the LNG request that was posed by Germany, and the federal government said there's no business case here, and yet the United States now is one of the primary providers, and the world is thirsting for LNG, which we're finally going to get into. We could have been 5 years ahead of schedule.
Germany, Japan, so many countries was asking for our LNG. The Premier of Alberta has signed a deal with Japan. Obviously, there's a business case. They obviously want our natural gas.
Okay, well, let's flip to the China story. I mean, I find this astounding that the degree to which China and the United States economies are interconnected, at least from a manufacturing in China and consuming in the US, Dollarama does very well. So what, do you think this should be taken seriously? Do you think China will finally blink?
I think we've been at a tipping point for about a year. If anyone doesn't believe that China is not a trading partner, that it is the enemy of largest concern for the North American continent, then I don't believe they've been following what Xi has been trying to do for the past 10 years. He's built his armed forces to the point that within the next 3 years, and I believe sooner, they will make the move for Taiwan and in fact go for more. I think what Trump has recognized is that there's two ways to perhaps deal with this current and very real threat from China. And one of them is to see if he can economically cripple them rather than go to war against them, because I think they will initiate it, not us for sure. But on the economic front, China's made itself far more resilient in the past 10 years. The BRICS organization, the Brazil, Russia, Iran, India, and South America, China group has tried to move away from the US currency as the currency of choice. They've allowed people to trade without US dollars ever being involved. The pipeline from Iran that brings oil and gas through India to China, China has very much tried to make it so that when the US, when they go to war against the US or they have an economic war with the US, they have a very diverse group of trading partners to replace the United States consumer market. It will never replace the US consumer market. The US is still the largest consumers, but they've really tried to soften that blow. And I think they've been getting ready for this for 10 years. But with their military activity in the South China Sea, their activities with North Korea towards South Korea, that entire sphere, this may push China to move faster than it may have wanted, but its aim was always to grab Taiwan and make a sphere of defense that pushes out, at least into the South China Sea, including Indonesia, Borneo, and all the way up to Japan.
Or either one of the prime minister's candidates have this perspective? I know we have discussed this when we discussed Fortress America, which is Trump's calling, and we refer to Fortress North America, that Canada ought to recognize what the US seems to be recognizing and prepare itself. Are either one of our candidates speaking to this topic?
Well, they're talking about Canadian national sovereignty and Canadian defense. I don't take anything that Carney is saying seriously, because after 10 years of this government destroying the Canadian Armed Forces, the things that he's talking about now, he clearly doesn't understand either the Canadian Armed Forces or sovereignty of Canada very well. He has massive personal trading interests in China. He's done a whole bunch of business just in the last 3 years in China, borrowing over almost $250 million from the Bank of China. He's interlocked with China. Polyev is completely on the other side. He has recognized that China is not an ally or a friend or a reliable business partner, but both of them are hamstrung because of the economy of our country that the Liberals have got us into in terms of revitalizing the armed forces. And that's why I wrote the paper on how to rebuild the Canadian forces in a jumpstart mode over the next 3 years. The challenge is we don't have an ability to contribute seriously. And the foreign interference in Canada has been blatant for the past 10 years, and in the last 3, even worse. So this election is compromised by China, and I can't see how people don't realize the threat that they pose, not just to Canada, but to all of North America. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this election. If Mr. Carney wins, I think we're in for a lot of trouble, because the United States cannot permit Canada to be a hotbed for Chinese activity in North America.
Well, given this perspective, and it's been shared by others who we've interviewed in the course of the last couple of months, it would seem to me this should be a primary issue in the election.
It should be, and in the French debate last night, security and defense wasn't even discussed. I'm told it might be a part of a topic tonight. It should be an entire topic tonight, but at best, it'll be part of a topic.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this, either raising their hand with sympathy or just raising their hand to raise another question or another perspective? I see Norm is going to join us shortly. Go ahead, Dawn.
I was thinking there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the massive immigration that we've had that is eroding our culture and taxing our systems like healthcare and housing and education and so forth. And I think the the size of government, I don't know how many people are really speaking to that and the reckless spending and the lack of productivity at on the government end of things. There's not many speaking to that. And I thought it was very interesting listening to Maxime Bernier speak. And he's not, doing all that well in the polls, but it's like he doesn't even exist. And I don't know how many Canadians realize how terribly compromised our mainstream media is. And so, people really aren't getting the story unless maybe they watch the debate tonight, but then certain people aren't even included in the debate. So how much information do Canadians get on which to base their decisions? So anyway, I wanted to chip in with that because I think economy is always number one in terms of the citizens' minds, but I also think this whole business about massive immigration that we've had has been particularly taxing on the country and shown a total lack of respect for all the Canadian citizens that have come before and the hard work that they've done to build the country and put pretty good systems in place. Just to have over the last 10 years them deteriorating, and then this added insult of people, especially when people come from other cultures that don't have the same values and maybe they bring their problems with them. I mean, traditionally, we've always been pretty good at opening our doors to those that have a fair bit in common with us. And so they can assimilate quite well and everybody can get along, not badly. But this is a big, I think this is a big issue that no one seems to be talking about it too much.
Immigration was raised, I do recall briefly yesterday, and I remember Carney saying, well, we've slowed down. We recognize we need to get housing and we need to get some of the infrastructure up to speed. I was reading today that Canada's healthcare system is the second lowest among the 59 nations that were surveyed. There's a major issue as well, and yet we're wedded to the socialized system and tolerating these waiting lists. It's absurd. I mean, there's an election issue, at least at the provincial and federal level. Yogi, you had your hand up first, and then I'll go to Shirley.
Thank you, Perry. Don made a very brief reference to productivity, and as we've discussed here before, if we're preparing for this new world, this new, more dangerous world that David has talked about, we need to get ready. And get ready for me includes a number of points. One, we need to raise our productivity, and two, we need to build on our strengths. And our strengths are very clearly in the resource development, because due to just geological luck, we have been blessed with many resources. And if we're going to improve our situation, and what I mean by situation is improve our income, reduce our debt, improve our defenses, build our infrastructure, all of those items that I just listed cost a lot of money. And how are we going to get our hands on money? There's really only one. It's called resource development. And we need to quit inflicting pain on ourselves to avoid that. And that's where the money is going to come from all the new expenditures that we need to make, and to reduce our debt to position ourselves to handle all this. And the healthcare problem is only going to be solved by new capital. And I know that's political dynamite, but we have no choice but to bring new capital into the system. And I know that's immediately translated by some people in that dreaded word privatization. And that's not what I intend, but a little more privatization can't hurt us. And we probably have no choice except to acknowledge the two-tier healthcare system that a number of those countries that we admire actually have, even though we don't recognize it.
So unfortunately, privatization has taken on the negative aspect as an ideology, because privatization ultimately, when translated, is personalization. And it's through privatization that the consumer, that is the patient, ultimately becomes the primary focus as opposed to the supplier. So I think you've made a major point there. I'm reading some articles sympathetic to that perspective in the National Post today. Also, National Post, an opinion article said, isn't it obvious that the economic integration of the United States and Canada, given the proximity to one another and the relevance of that market to Canada, will last forever? And anybody who gets in the way needs to make an effort to stop it, because it's so natural to trade with your local neighbor. Shirley, your turn.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of economists speak in the last year, and unlike the politicians, they're not afraid of talking about the immigration issue. And I would like to hear them speak about it because it is driving the housing crisis. It's contributing to the food situation with the food banks, etc. The economists, I have been listening all my life to the fact that immigration is going to solve our demographic problems. Has it? No. So that's not working either. And there isn't the sufficient number of jobs. And economists have really warned that this has to change, or we're going to become a developing country. We're not, the productivity of these people coming to Canada is, yes, there's some value for sure, and there's shortages in certain areas that we need a lot more people for, but they have to tie the immigration to target those areas and not just a free-for-all. It's been quite a mess, and they're saying that now there used to be 7 people in the workforce to take care of the seniors group and the demographics. There's now 3, which they're anticipating declining even further. And if they're going to bring more people into the country that are going to rely on the social services, who's going to be able to provide that? I mean, people are taxed so heavily now that they're struggling, and you're going to put more and more people into the homeless category, just trying to survive. So there needs to be some drastic change.
Well, there has been a discussion that we need to be more merit-based or capacity-based or competency-based in the immigration system instead of just almost an open border approach. And that seems to be the change that's talked about, and increasing the apprenticeship program. So that has gotten some attention, but probably not adequate. And whether or not the population base is adequate to support the standards of healthcare and social services and welfare for seniors, I mean, I think it's ridiculous that we haven't ratcheted up the age of entitlement. That when it was established by Bismarck way back in the 19th, 20th century, the age, the longevity was in around 65. It's now around 85. And yet we haven't moved the age of entitlement since Bismarck. It's ridiculous. I know Europe is trying to do it, and they put on yellow jackets and go to the streets and riot. It should have been done 15 years ago, before the seniors actually arrived with the power base that they've got. But I was involved with a study with Norm Duick's wife with the Alberta government some years ago, and they put our recommendations in a safe. Shirley, do you still have your hand up, or are you happy now? Okay, I guess your hand's going down. I really think that China story is a major one. I can't get away from it, particularly because it emphasizes the relevance of Fortress North America and the importance of Canada recognizing that it is a very vulnerable country given its coastal exposure. It is sympathetic. The sympathy is that it has the U.S. as a partner and its border, and yet being anti-American seems to be very popular. It may not be so popular in the event that we find our borders being penetrated or being stressed or being threatened. I think anybody in the military probably is well aware of that, and yet haven't been able to make that point get across to our political leaders who have the pocketbooks in hand of the defense. David.
So I totally agree. The Polyev has tried to make the point several times about the linkages between China and some of the activities. And certainly, if you look at what the marches, I was just in Ottawa for a week, And on Saturday, there was a massive pro-Hamas march in Ottawa, absolutely massive. The entire point of it is, in my book, the link between the IRGC, the Islamic Republican Guard, which is the military wing of the state of Iran, is funded almost completely now by China. When they built that quote unquote pipeline on the Belt and Road Initiative, there's not a hell of a lot of oil going through it, but there's a hell of a lot of money coming the other direction from China into Iran for a number of purposes. They're funding Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the entire funding envelope coming from China into Iran. When you look at the marches that are happening in the streets of all of the major cities in both the United States and Canada, you'll find an amazing similarity between the placards, the equipment, the scarves, the uniforms. That's because it's all funded from one common source. They've realized that if they buy all this stuff and buy it in bulk and then ship it all over North America, they can get really good rates for their kill all Christians, kill all Jews, kill all Canadian signs. And they're doing it blatantly. When I directed counterterrorism in Alberta back 2001 to 2003, we knew from CSIS reports that are unclassified that Alberta and Canada was one of the largest fundraising centers for ISIS and Al-Qaeda at that time. They were under the outside of common vision at that time, but they were making money and running their drives for funding all through our country. They're much more blatant now. And when you see marches every weekend in all our major cities, these aren't accidental and these aren't normally spurred and run by Canadians. Now, lots of Canadians join them because our young people think that it's great to have revolutions. I remember people marching against the Vietnam War back when I was a teenager. This is, you can attract lots of people, and we see the NDP actually in full support. I don't know if you watched the French debates last night, but Jagmeet Singh was very clear in his support for Hamas and Gaza and saying that the poor Gazans was a genocide when in fact it was the Gazans who started this war long time ago, not the Gazans, the Arab group and so the funding that's coming in through the IRGC into our countries is real, but it's linked, folks, back to China. China is very serious in trying to break apart the unity of our country. So when I hear Don talk about unity and the large immigration, when you bring 2 million people into a country of 40 million, you're going to end up with this problem. And everyone, I heard Carney say it last night, diversity is a strength. No, it's not. Diversity is not a strength, particularly when it's a diversity of basic values. And one of the things we have to remember of the basic values of the Islamic world is women aren't equal. Okay? So one of the cornerstones of our Canadian democracy is that we're all equal. We were one of the first countries in the world to give women the vote, to make sure that we included half our population in our democracy, when clearly the people that are now marching in our streets don't represent that. So we need to have this discussion. In my opinion, immigration should be frozen completely across all 4 categories for 1 year, so that we can look at all of our immigration systems and decide what we're going to do for workers, what we're going to do for university education, what we're going to do for regular immigration, and what we're going to do for refugee programs. We need to look at all 4 and take a pause while we resolve this unity question that was caused by mass immigration at this point, because the people that are preparing for the ability to disrupt Canadian society should China make its grand move are already in our streets.
Well, China seems to be quite subtle, or is it overt and we're just missing it and the media is ignoring it?
It's very overt. If you look what's happened in the South China Seas, if you look at the building of land-based aircraft carriers, which are all those atolls, which they have totally refurbished, put massive airships on. The blue water navy that China has built in the last 10 years is extremely impressive. Their new fighter jet will challenge an F-35. China's going at this whole hog. They have massively expanded their military. They put economic pressure on the world. The Belt and Road Initiative now has 147 votes in the UN. So out of 197 countries, they control 147 votes. This didn't happen in a heartbeat. They've been working on this for 10 years and they've got it. So the United Nations has been compromised. They're being very overt. They're not making no bones about it. And they've made all the recent exercises all around Australia, all around Taiwan, all around Japan in the last 6 months show that they're moving faster rather than slower.
Well, maybe Trump is onto something, but the question is whether or not either one of the candidates running for prime minister is sympathetic to that view. We need to stop talking about Trump's personality, though. We need to get onto these policy issues, and I wish to hell that that would be the focus of discussion instead of personality. Yogi.
Thank you, Perry. I think the first thing we need to do, Canada, to recognize the new world that David is describing is get rid of the impediments that are getting in our own way. And to be specific, I'm thinking the ones that have been discussed in the media recently, interprovincial trade barriers, excessive regulation barriers, our debt, our public debt inhibitors. And the inhibit of public debt isn't the debt itself, it's the interest payments that we make every year that prevent some of these other investments that we need to make. And it's interesting to me that various organizations, Brookfield among them, I know we give a lot of airtime to Brookfield because Carney's been so closely associated with them, but they're not the only ones who are investing Canadian pension dollars in other countries because the returns are higher and the risks are lower for both reasons. And that's crazy. We should be able to make Canada an appealing investment location for Canadian pension dollars. So let me be very clear. I'm not being critical of what the management of those pension funds are doing. They're acting in the interests of the pensioners. I'm just saying, what are we doing to ourselves by creating a climate that causes that kind of behavior among the management of these pension funds? And we do have some significant advantages that we're not exploiting. And I could wax at length, but I think you know them. Resources, educated population, closeness to the US market, notwithstanding this tariff fiasco, and we're English speaking. Those are some rather obvious advantages that we can leverage a lot more.
Good summary, and I gather that the debate is now beginning, so we're going to give a shot and see whether or not we can actually broadcast it. Thanks, Mark, for your input. Always a delight to have you visit us, so thank you.
Cheers.
Okay. I think we should never underestimate the threat that Mr. Trump poses on Quebec economy and Canada economy and Mexico economy. But we must acknowledge the fact that the economy of Quebec is built differently. The challenges are not the same. The necessity for Quebec to have at least partly its own voice in the negotiation is important. The difference between Quebec and Canada is very important in terms of economy, but also in terms of identity and language and values and who we are and the way we want to handle immigration. So we have the right to be different, and if this difference is being respected by whoever becomes Prime Minister of Canada, we will be reliable partners in order to achieve the best possible negotiation and protect ourselves and our economies as partners.
Merci, Monsieur Blanchet. Okay, we now move into open debate, and I'll start it off, Mr. Carney, with you, and then we go from there. Do you still support dollar-for-dollar tariffs, even if they ultimately threaten Canadian jobs and businesses?
No, and in fact, we've already moved off from dollar-for-dollar tariffs. We have to recognize, and I think we all do, the United States economy is more than 10 times the size of the Canadian economy. And the principle in terms of our counter tariffs is to have maximum impact in the United States, as I said a moment ago, minimum impact here. So we have to think about the impact on Canadian businesses. I'll give you one example, if I may. In the auto sector, the way we've designed those auto tariffs is that Canadian automakers, if they maintain production here, if they maintain their investments here, when I say Canadian automakers, I mean automakers that have jobs and plants and production in Canada, then they can have lower tariffs on what they ship to the United States. We create a huge incentive for them in order to do that. We also have carved out the Canadian auto parts sector. Last point, I know you're pressed for time, the Canadian auto parts sector, so that it can remain competitive with the United States. We're focused on maximizing Canadian jobs, maximizing the harm in the U.S. So that we get them where we need them.
Mr. Poilievre, you want in, then Mr. Singh.
Well, Mr. Carney, you claim that you want our country to respond with strength, but after the last decade, half of which time you've been Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, our economy is weaker than ever before. It's been the worst growth in the G7. We've lost $500 billion of investment south of the border. You supported blocking pipelines in Canada that gave Donald Trump and the U.S. a near monopoly over our energy. And now you want to keep in place Bill C-69, the liberal no new development law that blocks us from shipping our resources overseas. How could you possibly think it's a good idea to give the Americans a continued monopoly on our energy projects when you have seen how much these liberal policies have weakened our country over the last decade?
Let Mr. Carney respond, and then Mr. Singh.
Sure. If I may, yes. So let's go to my record. My record is a month long as Prime Minister. And this goes to the heart of coming to the Americans with strength, but doing the right thing for Canada. Within the first week as Prime Minister, I sat down with all the premiers of the provinces and territories, as well as the leaders of the Indigenous peoples. Got an agreement with all the provinces and territories, doesn't happen very often, got an agreement for them to have one Canadian economy instead of 13, first point. Secondly, to commit the federal government to do its part by Canada Day, so free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Thirdly, the federal government to commit with respect to project reviews.
The question was about
Sorry,
pipelines.
I'm getting to it. Thirdly, one project, one review, and relying
That's not
on
possible
provincial.
under
Yes, it is
C-69.
possible under. It is possible on our system.
No,
it
it's
is
not.
the
It's
impact
banned
assessment.
under C-69.
It is agreed on under the impact assessment framework, and we have a cooperation agreement with British Columbia already. We're looking forward to them with the other provinces. We will move forward.
no,
I've got to let
jump in
okay,
on this.
Mr. Singh's turn, please.
The
Of course,
anti-development
of
law.
course, we agree around having a strategic response to the United States. But what I'm concerned about is what we're doing here in Canada. We are already seeing threats to our country in that just the threats alone of the tariffs have meant Canadians have lost their jobs. The threats of the tariffs that are in place right now, the impact of those tariffs is that we've lost jobs in steel, aluminum, and the auto sector. People are already losing their jobs. And while, Mr. Carney, you had time, as you mentioned, not very long time, but as Prime Minister, you showed us your priorities. The first thing you did is you had traveled, you made a tax cut for millionaires, which was reversing on the capital gains. So you gave a tax cut to millionaires, but you didn't have time to increase the amount that workers get on EI. Right now, workers who are struggling and wondering, what am I going to do if I lose my job? Workers who've lost their job are saying, how do I pay my bills when EI only covers half of a worker's salary? Maybe 40 years ago that would have worked, but right now most workers are spending their entire salary just to pay the bills, to pay their mortgage and their rent, and to put food on the table. So EI is not good enough, and it shows Canadians that you didn't make it a priority to protect those that are impacted by these tariffs, that are threatened because their jobs are lost.
We have not heard from Monsieur Blanchet yet in this segment, so please.
Yeah, Mr. Carney, you are becoming a real Canadian leader, saying one thing in French and another one in English. You said in British Columbia in February that you would force oil and gas through pipelines through Quebec, either we wanted it or not. You would use emergency powers in order to do so. And 2 days later in Montreal, you said that you would never do that without the approval of Quebec. What's the point of using emergency powers if you do have the agreement of Quebec? However, I do agree with you. It's important to be very strong in front of Mr. Trump. However, I would keep the dollar for dollar policy. Don't be weak in front of Mr. Trump. And those counter tariffs have to be targeted. You have put out already $2 billion for Ontario auto industry, car industry, and the lumberwood industry in Quebec has already paid to United States $2 billion, and you have not raised one finger in order to help us.
Let's get from Mr. Poilievre and then a response from Mr. Carney.
Well, Mr. Carney refused to answer the question about pipelines. Just the other day, he said that he doesn't necessarily think we need to build pipelines. Let me tell you what that means. Right now, the Americans get 97% of our oil, 100% of our natural gas exports at big discounts. We have to send Canadian oil from Western Canada through the States just to get it back to Quebec because we don't have a pipeline. And now there's this law, Liberal Law C-69, which effectively bans pipelines. The 14 biggest energy and resource companies say it has to go if we're ever going to build another project. And I asked Mr. Carney why he would keep in place this anti-pipeline law that effectively empowers Donald Trump to have a total monopoly on our single biggest export. Why would you not repeal this Liberal law? Isn't it because you are exactly the same in the same line as Justin Trudeau and the rest of the Liberal team that is now making up your cabinet?
Let's get a response.
Well, let me pick up a couple of points that have been made. The first thing I did as Prime Minister was to cut the carbon tax. That's the first thing. Second thing is made a commitment that all proceeds from our tariffs will go to workers and those companies most affected. There were several points raised.
Nothing so far.
If I may, Mr. Steve, if I may address, I'm trying to do it quickly because several points raised. All proceeds go to workers and the firms most effective, and those proceeds are considerable. Third thing, I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in getting energy infrastructure built. That means pipelines, that means carbon capture storage, that means electricity grids. And here's how you do it. And we've already moved in the first month. Cooperation agreements with the provinces. Guess what? We are a federation. You need to cooperate with Quebec. You need to cooperate with the provinces. You need to get First Nations and Indigenous people buy-in. You can do that through the one project, one review window that we put in place at that first ministers' meeting, as well as, if necessary, using emergency powers to fulfill the federal responsibility, but not the unique.
Mr. Poilievre, you want to come back on that?
What you're saying, Mr. Carney, with respect, is a total contradiction. The No New Development Law, C-69, guarantees there will not be one-stop shop because it requires the Government of Canada to actually duplicate
So what Mr. Poilievre is saying is that have no rules,
project.
have no regulation,
have one-stop shop.
Mr. Singh,
over any energy
Mr. Singh, we just got to let him finish his sentence.
pollute.
Let's just let him finish his sentence.
That is not true. In fact, Mr. Singh, the reality is we should have strong rules enforced once. We shouldn't have multiple levels of referral that it takes now 17 years to get a major project approved in this country. That is why in the last 10 years we've had the worst economic growth in the entire G7. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change, and the Conservative plan for a change will include repealing the anti-pipeline law so we can get our energy to markets other than the United States.
Mr. Singh, then Mr. Carney.
While these two compete about who's more pro-pipeline, I think what we need to do is, it's clear. The Liberals bought a pipeline. They built a pipeline. I don't know what Pierre is complaining about. That's what they did. I think what we need to do, if we're talking about energy in our country, we need to build an east-west grid. Let's use our power as a nation to build a national project that creates good jobs, that strengthens us for the future, where we connect the low-cost energy from jurisdictions and provinces across this beautiful land and have low-cost energy for businesses, for people, so we can build a stronger economy. That's the energy of the future that we need.
Mr. Carney.
3 quick points. First, the pipeline built, yes, TMX built. That's why oil exports up 50% over the course of the last few years. Secondly,
I don't think
Mr. Singh is absolutely right about the east-west grid. Grid interconnections, which is part of the energy corridor, huge opportunities for this country. We have to be able to do more than one thing. Third point, fundamental point. We can give ourselves far more than Donald Trump can ever take away. If we have one Canadian economy, not 13, and if we just look at that agreement we got with the provinces, look at what Ontario and Nova Scotia have just announced in terms of their steps towards this, this is within our grasp.
Monsieur Blanchet, what should we be prepared to concede in our negotiations with the United States?
I want to be back to something that Mr. Carney said. You can't do something and the opposite, and you can't fill people's mind with nonsense. Quebec has, by law, its own environmental review institution, and you cannot, through a federal decision, even through a Quebec government decision, go over the BAP, as we call it. If the BAP says no,
Just say.
it's no.
I know.
Good.
I know,
Let's
but this
keep
is
that in mind.
This is the point. This is, if I may, this is the point. The federal government can do the following, which is to take the decision to abide by the decision of the Quebec BAP. That is within the federal government's power. That is known as cooperative federalism. That's what we need to do.
And do you
in a-
understand
this
one
is
other
what-
point
This is
fast?
what we need. If we, I mean, this is what we need to do in a crisis.
Bref Moïse, and then Mr. Poilievre.
Yeah. The building of those pipelines will take at least 10 to 14 years. Mr. Trump will be 90 years old, not president no more,
might-
and somebody,
try.
of course, less terrible will be there before you can even dream of having oil through this pipeline of yours.
We're less than a minute to go. Mr. Poilievre, I promised you next.
Listen, after the last 10 years of liberals blocking pipelines and killing jobs,
sounds wild when you
we
say that.
actually
Sounds
we
like-
actually need to get things
that makes
done.
sense.
We need a change, and our conservative plan for change will repeal the No New Pipelines law. It will create a true one-stop shop, set up shovel-ready zones with pre-permitting so that we can approve LNG liquefaction export plants, mines, pipelines, nuclear plants, and also
said no to
hydroelectric dams so that we can generate the power we need to be strong, self-reliant, and stand on our own 2
Can I-
feet for a change.
Last quick word to Mr. Carney.
Okay, quick word. Bringing it back to what we're talking about, which is tariffs, the threats to Canada, how to negotiate. We need these options. We need these options to build domestically, to build one Canadian economy. We need to act. We need to diversify our trade partners.
And that is
will
our
give us
time in
strength
this
to
segment.
the US.
That is our time. Okay, you know my job tonight. I got to be the heavy guy here every now and then, making sure everybody comes to time.
We've
And
got
I'm
trade
keeping an eye
defense
as
today.
well on making sure that everybody gets rough justice over here.
I think what we just heard was central to a central differentiator between the parties. I mean, you've got the NDP saying we need an energy corridor without being specific about what form of energy. We've got Carney saying C69, which is an impediment to the extent that the assessment process can be very severe and very long. And we've got Poilievre saying, let's go for it. We need energy. We need to build this energy corridor. We need to build a pipeline. Let's get on with it. So if you believe that the assessment process can be either overridden or sped up, you probably say Carney's reasonable. Having an assessment vehicle is reasonable. If you think it's just going to be a barrier as it has been in the past, then you've got Pierre on your side. I don't know whether anybody else sees it differently. Yogi, you want to weigh in there, or would we just call this a wrap up?
Well, I obviously lean towards Pierre. However, many Canadians don't. And Mark Carney is a man with very credible resume in many regards. But I hear him continuing what I see as the failed policies of the last decade. They don't address the productivity issue we've talked about. They don't address the debt that is, I think, an inhibitor to progress. And I could go on and on.
Well, I'm going to call it a wrap. We do try to keep these webinars to an hour. The debate is going to continue. We've still got till April, what is it, 28th, which is 2 weeks away. Let's call it a day. Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Yogi, and others who joined us today.